Well, he rode 10 hours by train from the Polish border to arrive here to meet Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky. President Biden was wearing a blue tie with yellow stripes, which are also colors of the Ukraine flag, as the country sees 1-year anniversary of the war with Russia this week. And his message was clear.
Later this week, we will announce additional sanctions against elites and companies that are trying to evade sanctions and backfill Russia's war machine. And thanks to bipartisan support in Congress, this week we're delivering billions in direct budgetary support. Putin's war of conquest is failing. Russia's military has lost half its territory it once occupied. Young, talented Russians are fleeing by the tens of thousands. Putin thought Ukraine was weak and the West was divided. As you know, Mr. President, I said to you in the beginning, he's counting on us not sticking together. And 1 year later, the evidence is right here in this room. We stand here together.
U.S. President Joe Biden there, who also promised $500 million in military aid to Ukraine, including artillery, ammunition, and also howitzers. This joins with nearly $30 billion worth of aid that the U.S. has already given to Ukraine since the Russian invasion began last year. So what's the cost of the Russian-Ukraine conflict for America? Let's speak to Mark Cancian, a former U.S. colonel who also oversaw budgets at Pentagon. He's now with the Center for Strategic and International Studies. Thanks, Mark, for joining us. Could you first tell us, what does this aid mean for Ukraine, which is now looking at 1-year anniversary against Russia? How much does it help?
Well, the aid has been absolutely vital for Ukraine's resistance. Without aid from the United States and from many other countries, the defense would have been overwhelmed in 2 or 3 weeks. Countries at war require a continuous flow of munitions and weapons. The United States and other countries have provided that. It has to continue if the Ukrainian resistance is to succeed.
But no advanced weapons that Ukraine has asked for were given by the U.S. this time, and that's what many critics have pointed out as well.
Many people focus on advanced weapons, but it's important to keep in mind that there are no silver bullets in this war. There's no single weapon that we can give Ukraine that will bring victory. Victory will come from the cumulative military capability, from weapons and equipment to training that's provided to Ukrainians and the morale of the Ukrainian people. What has been provided is the kind of things that the Ukrainian military needs to continue its resistance: ammunition, anti-tank weapons. This allows them to keep going for another couple of weeks.
Well, President Biden said that America will back Ukraine in its fight against Russia for as long as it takes. Now, how long can the U.S. government realistically send this level of support? We're talking about billions of dollars, which is also costing America.
Well, there's no question that the war is expensive. Over the course of a year, it was about $70 billion, including the humanitarian and economic aid. But you have to keep in mind that the U.S. military budget's about $800 billion, so it's not even 10% of the military budget. In theory, the aid could go on forever. Many people have pointed out that there is some opposition rising, both from the progressive left and the populist right. So far, they haven't had enough numbers to change the aid package. What will be important will be Ukraine's ability to show success on the battlefield. Everyone expects them to launch an offensive later in the spring. If that offensive is able to gain some territory, I think that the supporters will be heartened and be willing to continue the aid. If the offensive fails and it looks like this fighting is going to go on the same line month after month, I think that the prospect of a forever war will be very disturbing.
Very quickly then, Mark, there have been calls from political spectrum about the accountability as well over where this assistance is going.
Yes, so far there hasn't been any indication that assistance has been diverted, but that is a great fear. There's a lot of money, a lot of weapons. The United States has stood up some oversight efforts, but I think that there'll be a push to increase those. Nothing would be more damaging to the bipartisan consensus for
Mm.
aid than to see some of it diverted and some of the weapons going where they shouldn't.
Thanks, Mark, for joining us. Mark Kansian, there, a former U.S. colonel, who was there talking about the aid that's promised from the U.S. to Ukraine. Now, when it comes to Western economic sanctions, that was another part that President Biden talked about in Ukraine today, saying that they would be looking at sanctions against those individuals from Russia and Russia, but more details are yet to emerge. But there is another country that's been facing them since 2018, which is Iran. Now, Iran is no stranger to sanctions. There have been many in the past as well, but today Iran's national currency has hit an all-time low because the EU has said it will impose new sanctions to target officials for their response to deadly protests that were seen in Iran last year. The United States dollar surpassed a rate of 500,000 rials today. Now, this breaks the psychological mark for rial against the dollar. While Tehran has so far accused the West of being behind the protest, we wanted to look at what does weaker currency and depleting foreign reserves mean for people who are living there. Nadre Shamlu is a former senior advisor for World Bank. She's now in Washington, but she's been brought up in Iran. And she says it will have a deep economic impact.
Obviously, a very rapid decline or very rapid depreciation of any currency against the world's most important currency is very detrimental to any economy, because obviously Iran depends greatly on imports. So these imports are going to be much more expensive, and naturally, when they're converted then into the domestic currency, it's going to be highly fueling inflation, which is already quite high at around 60 to 70%.
And brought up in Iran, you still have ties with the country. You've been speaking to people there. There has been this immense political uprising in September. The world witnessed that. But now with this increase of pressure, economically as well, the household budget's going awry, how are people reacting to this day-to-day struggle of just living?
Yes, it is. It has been. People have essentially kind of narrowed down everything to the bare minimum, and that's essentially. I don't know how much longer people can even go further down. When you used to go to Iran, people were very generous. They would invite you. They would be offering many different dishes on the table. The better, the richer, the better, and everything. And I'm not just talking about the middle class. I'm not talking about the upper class. Now I hear that when you go to Iran and you go to people are very maybe they offer you tea or coffee or something like that. But those big parties or those family reunions have become rarer and rarer, and so in other words, people are hurting.
Nader, do you see the Western economic sanctions chokehold just getting stronger, especially because China, which is Iran's biggest oil customer, till now buying sanctioned but cheap barrels, it hasn't been that responsive, and it was evident in Iran's president's recent visit to China, where not much overture was made in terms of economic ties and strengthening them.
Well, even before this trip, one has to kind of take account of the fact that the only thing that, or at least the most important commodity or ties between China and Iran were the oil sales, and of course, in that domain, Iran was selling at 30% discount, and of course, also being somewhat displaced by Russia, because Russia also was trying to buy in or at least penetrate Iran's market with China. And of course, what was being paid in terms of payments, the bulk of the payments for oil were in yuan and not in dollars. So it didn't really help the Iranian dollar reserves, because even though they were selling to China, but they were getting yuans and not dollars. So that has an implication, of course, on the currency. Now, for some time, the protests inside Iran seemed to be kind of, calming down, quieting down, even though there was a huge erosion of the regime's kind of people who were sitting on the fence. You saw people who were before maybe supporting the regime, suddenly sounding kind of doubt and or issuing statements that were even, by Mir Hossein Mousavi, statements that were not really very comforting to the regime. Over the last couple of days, there have been new surges of protests. So that it indicates that the government cannot control the uprisings.
That was Nadre Shamlu, former senior advisor for World Bank. Now, another global hotspot we've been following here is Nigeria. Africa's largest economy is gearing up for elections, and it's getting quite costly actually to get its 90 million plus voters to the ballot boxes. The BBC's Peter Okwache has been crunching the numbers.
Nigeria is Africa's largest democracy, and it's heading for the polls again. The last 24 years have been the longest unbroken democratic run in the country's 63-year history. But this year's elections are set to be the costliest ever. According to Nigeria's Independent National Electoral Commission, or INEC, this year, 93.4 million Nigerians are registered to vote, just over 44% of the country's 209 million population. That number is 16.7 million higher than all the registered voters in the other 14 countries in the West African sub-region put together. For these elections, INEC needs to provide ballot boxes, ballot paper, transportation, security sensitization campaigns, electoral staff, and other ad hoc expenses. And all these come at a huge cost. According to the electoral body, this year's elections will cost Nigeria just over $667 million. This figure is a 61.37% increase over what was spent to conduct the general elections 4 years ago in 2019. Across the world, holding elections is very expensive, and this cost is determined by the size of the democracy and the available infrastructure, amongst other indices. For more stable and established democracies, the average cost per voter is put at between $1 and $3. For Nigeria, these elections are going to cost $7 for every single one of those 93 million registered voters. Given these eye-watering amounts, and given the dwindling revenues accruing to the Nigerian government, especially in the wake of the COVID-19 pandemic, the war in Ukraine, and a global cost of living crisis, many political observers are beginning to argue that these amounts are not sustainable for elections when they can be deployed to other areas of desperate need, such as education, health, and transport sectors, or used to address insecurity.
Basic needs are not...
One of those questioning the sustainability of such large election budgets is Dr. Ishaka Al-Mustafa, a political commentator on Nigeria and a lecturer at the University of Plymouth in the UK.
I don't believe elections in Nigeria are financially sustainable. The key reasons, my main point, are that elections are very costly. In Nigeria, is a country where basic needs are not being met. Example, water supply, basic health, basic education. Universities on strike for 8 months, requesting for money to be funded, to fund the universities, to equip them, to ensure education in the country become well above standard.
And recently, during an appearance at the London think tank Chatham House, that same point was put to the head of Nigeria's Independent National Electoral Commission, or INEC, Professor Mahmood Yakubu.
As far as INEC is concerned, we conduct elections on the basis of what the law says we should do. It is not our business to do advocacy for extension of tenure.
So what do ordinary Nigerians make of this?
My opinion on that is it's nice to do it for the 7 years so that the excess spending of people coming maybe dual time, maybe after the first running, they also want to come for the second running.
That 7 years is okay. So that where somebody rule like 7 years, where the person go, the person will not come back again.
Ultimately, the justification for the cost of these elections will come down to if Nigerians see them as transparent. INEC will have to earn this trust through impartiality and fairness. It seems the ball is firmly in INEC's court.
That was BBC's Peter Okwache. And talking about transparency, there's one thing which needs more transparency from all the news that's come from this world, and that's cryptocurrency. Despite its reputation for volatility, many Asian countries are still looking to capitalize on the popularity of cryptocurrency. And Hong Kong is one of them. Its government is planning to allow retail investors, that is, private individuals, people like you and me, to trade in Bitcoin and Ether using licensed exchanges. Now, Singapore has allowed the practice for some time, and Emily Nicole, a crypto blogger at Bloomberg, tells us about what this means.
It's pretty significant in terms of retail access to crypto, particularly in the Asia region, because it wasn't that long ago that mainland China banned access to crypto for residents. And of course, Hong Kong has become a lot closer with China in the last year or so. And so Hong Kong making these moves to make itself a global financial center and improve access to crypto for not just retail investors, but also institutional investors. This change means that there's going to be basically a lot more crypto around. And of course, that might even improve access to crypto for mainland Chinese residents as well.
But what's led to the change? Because globally, there has been quite a bit of distrust on crypto firms, especially as many cryptocurrencies have collapsed.
It's a bit of a to and fro, I guess, right? So we've obviously had a very tumultuous year for crypto. There's been a lot of collapses, bankruptcies, and even fraud scandals. And on the other side of that, you've got regulators who want to make sure that those who are accessing crypto are doing it in the safest way possible and in a way that regulators can see what they're doing. And so some jurisdictions like Hong Kong, like Europe, like Singapore and Dubai are trying to really entice crypto businesses into their countries, into their regulatory regimes so that they can get their arms around them in a way. And that comes with trade-offs. It means that obviously crypto will be more prevalent in those areas, and that does increase the risk for retail investors wanting to access those assets. But it also means that perhaps those regulators might have a better view of the sector and can hopefully have a bit more oversight over where the next FTX or other crypto collapse might be.
But you've had countries like Singapore, which allowed retail trading, but then again, it has been seeing its own crypto controversies with last year's collapse of dollar peg token Terra USD as well. So are there lessons that Hong Kong needs to be wary of?
For sure. I think obviously there's an element of hubris in all this, right? Regulators like to say that they're putting their hands around this, they're going to be able to do more to protect investors, but really there's still an element of risk. FTX is a really good example of a business that was really open with regulators about wanting to be regulated. It was at the forefront of all those conversations. Sam Bankman-Fried, the CEO, was in front of Congress every other week, it felt like. And under the hood, what we now know is that there was allegedly fraud going on and none of it was really even true. So there's always that risk that these regulators are taking on. But I guess the hope is that as more regulatory regimes come to the fore, lots of global bodies like the FSB, like the G20, want to make sure that all regulatory regimes around the world are matching up so that crypto can be effectively supervised no matter what country you're in.
So how will this exchange work then? Will international investors will also be allowed to invest? Or it's only for people from Hong Kong and mainland China?
We're not too sure of the specifics yet, but for example, if you look at the US, a lot of exchanges have US-based sites that say only US investors can use them and US investors are not allowed to use their other sites that are offered elsewhere. So sometimes those kind of boundaries are put in place, but with crypto as it is, those things aren't always very well enforced, and sometimes those checks aren't being done sufficiently either. So there's nothing to say that users in Hong Kong, for example, couldn't access exchanges elsewhere, and the other way around, if there are exchanges that aren't doing sufficient your customer checks, the investors from abroad couldn't access in as well. That is something, though, that the regulators are trying to avoid.
That was Emily Nicole, a crypto blogger, and we have Alex in the studio. Alex Bell, crypto for you, trustworthy or not, Alex?
Oh, that's a big question, Davina. I think there are winners and losers in any investment game, but perhaps stronger on both sides with crypto.
Let's talk about the economic news then.
Sure. Well, the top story really is this latest economic news coming out of Russia. It seems, in spite of the weight of Western sanctions, we were talking about financial aid to Ukraine before, Russia's economy is actually faring better than expected. GDP there shrank by 2.1% in 2022, according to the official statistics department of the Russian government. That is well below what many analysts were expecting. And of course, there is always a concern over validity when it comes to Russian data. But we do know the rising price of oil and the huge amount of domestic spending ordered by Vladimir Putin's regime has slowed that expected decline.
Briefly, Alex, can you also talk about Elon Musk and if there's some interesting new information about ownership of his company Tesla?
Sure. It now seems that Elon Musk's shareholding in Tesla is declining even more than we realise. The Financial Times reporting today that more of the company is now owned by America's big three index funds, BlackRock, Vanguard and State Street, than Elon himself.
Well, thanks, Alex, for that roundup as always. And as we wrap the show up, whether you're a fan of K-pop or not, you will probably recognize some of these songs. Corporate takeover battle of the year, and this battle is here in this industry. And now Hype, known for BTS Group, wants to acquire majority shareholder in SM Entertainment, which is being resisted by other shareholders of the company. Bernie Cho is an insider, president of DFSP Collective, who says these two companies are the big players in the industry and has been following this keenly.
The battle royale between some of the titans of Korea's music, entertainment, and media industry really boils down to two words: power and control. Now, that in and of itself is fine, but where the problem started to arise was the fact that although he wanted to unload all of his shares in SM Entertainment, he still insisted on having power and control over SM Entertainment as the chief producer and as the chief creative and essentially as the chief officer. And that was something that rubbed a lot of people the wrong way. And the current management of SM Entertainment, in their SM 3.0 mission statement that they released on YouTube, clearly stated they were moving towards a multi-label, multi-producer business model, but made it clear that Chairman Lee was not to be part of this new movement going forward. That did not sit well with Chairman Lee, and as a result, he turned around and sought investment from Hybe. And so you have the biggest music company in Korea, Hybe, going head-to-head with the biggest tech company, Kakao, for the power, the control of SM Entertainment.
And Hybe, many from the global audience would know, is actually behind the success of BTS, which is the famous K-pop group. Could you tell us that what does this mean for Hybe?
For many fans and even financial analysts, they may see or know Hybe as purely a music company, the home to BTS. But the reality is Hybe is much more than that. Hybe is not just only a music company, but they've also emerged and evolved into a tech company. And so although a lot of observers are looking at this play for SM Entertainment in somehow way being an IP play or a content play or an artist play, it's actually much more than that. It's really a tech play as well. And currently, Hybe is making a very strong play, a market-leading play in both fan community platforms and now in the Web3 metaverse. And by virtue of making a majority investment play for SM Entertainment, they're no longer going to be the market leaders in Web2, Web3 platforms. They're going to be the market standard by taking on SM Entertainment as part of the content portfolio they're looking to consolidate in this K-pop Web2, Web3 space.
How are K-pop fans reacting to this